Hello and welcome. My name is Maren Sakri. I run demand generation for Evolv Technologies. Thank you for taking the time out of your day. If it's anything similar to mine, where I'm often found jousting with a 2-year-old and 5-year-old while attempting to try and maintain some type of decorum with my colleagues, I certainly empathize and also congratulate you. So this is our second virtual panel in the Think CX Digital Leaders Tell All series. Today we focus on the Great Collide, using data to create a great customer experience. Forrester recently shared an article that highlights the importance of customer experience and the importance of recalibrating those efforts now. The 3 main points they shared were starting with empathy, adapting your CX accordingly, and helping your employees to deliver great CX despite the crisis. Organizations' digital channels must be more emotionally attuned now more than ever. And at the crux of that is data, which is why this topic today is so incredibly important. Before I introduce our panelists, if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to put those into the queue and we'll take those questions at the end. For those of you that may be triple tasking, we'll also distribute a recording after the event as well. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel of digital leaders. Veronica Sansa is the co-founder of Commerce Next Summit and leads the retail practice for Chameleon Collective. She also contributes to Forbes on how to grow retail and e-commerce in the age of Amazon. Having started and sold a startup, which worked with some of the largest retailers, Veronica has intimate knowledge of the challenges facing retail and e-commerce today. She is also an advocate for women in business and founded the global nonprofit Embolden, formerly Women in Wireless. Thanks for joining us today, Veronica.
Thank you so much for having me.
Our next panelist, Ben Lebay, is the research director at CXL Agency. He combines 10 years of academic and statistics training with customer experience and UX knowledge to scope and run conversion research programs for companies around the world, including ADP, Code Academy, Serta Simmons, MongoDB, and Procter & Gamble. From B2B lead generation to direct to consumer e-commerce, Ben has added millions to revenue to clients by applying scientific rigor and understanding, then changing customers' perceptions and behaviors. Thanks for joining us, Ben. Look forward to chatting with you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Cash Bennett is a product manager at Evolv, where he works across software development, design, and marketing teams to deliver features that maximize impact for their customers. Prior to joining Evolv, Cash led product management and software development teams at WeWork, where he focused on building developer tools to help rapidly scale the business and create an excellent user experience for members. Cash is also a licensed architect and has built digital experiences for that industry that bring measurable analysis of user experience into the complex realm of physically constructed space. Thanks for joining us, Cash.
Happy to be here.
All right, and so we will kick it off. Our first question, why is data so crucial to creating a great customer experience? And what kinds of data do you find most useful? Veronica, could you kick us off today?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I mean, ultimately, you have to understand your customer in order to serve them well. And data is the foundation of that understanding so that it can power the personalization. When you look at the kind of data that's important, it's a combination of both first-party data, so things like order history, browse history, customer service data, as well as third-party data, when it's available, because that can be incredibly important and useful in improving CX. So, for example, with this COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen that different locations, depending on how impacted they are, have different consumption and browse patterns. So even being able to get basic third-party data, like where the user is coming from, can change how you communicate with them, in a time of crisis like we have now. So overall, it's the foundation of understanding the people that visit your site and helping deliver great experiences to them.
Great, thank you. Ben, did you have anything to add here?
Yeah, I'd kind of come in from a data science perspective, and which fits under this umbrella of decision science. So I look at data as a tool to help inform better decision making. That's what we're all after. So regardless of the type of data, quantitative, first party, third party, qualitative, it all helps us to make better decisions, to move the ship of our product or digital experience, our whatever it might be, in the direction where we need to move it, so we, help out growth. So, what data is most useful for one particular type of decision might be different for another type of decision. In these kind of times right now, where a lot of brute force growth is needed, or a lot of brute force attention, we need to act now. A lot of data that speaks to more strategic growth or more long-term perspectives are less useful. And so it's quite interesting to think about the types of data that we need now versus what we needed maybe 2 months ago, or what we were focusing on a couple months ago.
You had, when we spoke originally, you had mentioned Netflix. Can you talk a little bit about Netflix and why it works so well?
Yeah, just in terms of, I brought up Netflix as an example of sort of this recent phenomenon of experience trumping everything. And a lot of, historically, we made decisions, or we bought products based on feature set, and then it might be price. But more and more lately, it's all about the experience. And so experience is the new way that we evaluate products, in the sense that experience trumps now price, it trumps feature set, it determines how we relate to a brand. So, Netflix, Google, Apple, these companies in an experience-driven way are now setting the standard for who is competing with you on an experience level, right? People might be frustrated with your UI, UX, your e-commerce funnel, and they're more and more frustrated with you because they have so many seamless experiences on sites like Netflix or Google or something like that. These companies, a lot of times tech companies, are kind of at the bleeding edge of customer experience in terms of listening to their customers, streamlining, delighting customers, using data to do that in a very personalized way. And so, yeah, so from that perspective, that's why kind of Netflix is a good example of using data to be real competitive in this space, and not just against other streaming services, right?
Right.
People are starting to use those seamless experiences to benchmark what they see elsewhere.
Ben, you mentioned Netflix and Google, but both of those companies have a ton of data. They have a lot of users. So for smaller companies that don't have, so many users as Netflix and Google, like, how can they take the data they have and create better experiences? Because there's a big canyon between those kinds of companies and the rest of the world.
Yeah, that's a good question. If you've been on Google lately at some of their products, think about Gmail or Google Slides, Calendar, even the A/B testing tool, which I go into quite a bit, or whatnot. A ton of, like, within this last year, you'll see little pop-ups like, how are we doing? Almost like NPS type of questions. And, give us your feedback. How do you rate us? Some smiley faces. Google, the king or queen of data, if they have more data than anybody, like you say, if they're collecting customer experience like data like this in this manner, it really tells you that experience is now trumping, price and feature set and things like that. And it is the key to focus. And it also provides you with an example of how smaller businesses can kind of come in and compete, talking with their customers, polls, surveys, codifying customer service chat logs and things like this. That's the angle to come in from and compete.
It's interesting now too, because there's a lot of folks that are using different types of technology that would have probably never even attempted to use it previously. My mom is one of those examples. She just was asking me for a Netflix password recently. And she's like, this is so cool. So now, now all of her experiences are going to be built around her current experience using Netflix. So her perception has completely changed, which brings me a little bit to personalization and decision-making. Cash, can you talk a little bit about personalization and decision-making and how data plays into that?
Sure, yeah. I would echo Veronica's comment about how important personalization is, and then further what Ben said about decision making. And what's hard is combining those together, because the data set becomes so rich and complex. You have so many decisions to make in order to personalize the experience for each user so that they feel like they're having an experience that speaks to them. And so, what are the workflows and the tools that allow companies to do that? What are the, sort of best practices and team processes that you can put in place to enable such a kind of complex study of all the different options for all the different users? And historically, traditionally, these capacities have been somewhat siloed between the effort towards personalization and the effort towards data analysis and decision-making and prioritization. And what I think is exciting is we're starting to see an emerging trend in the industry where there's sort of a new paradigm that mixes these two methodologies together. And there are ways that are making it easier to quickly and automatically personalize based on the recommendations from large data sets, which you use to make decisions about personalization. And I think that's just a super interesting kind of trend that's emerging in the space.
Moving on to our next question, how should companies use data to influence their product strategy? Ben, could you kick us off here?
Yeah, so right now, behavioral data points from across a bunch of industries, we're seeing just a lot more engagement, generally longer sessions, more consideration time, a lot more people on desktop as they're home. And so in these times, especially, being more conversational, communicative, informative kind of helps these strategies. It helps collect data to influence these strategies of the businesses. Perception and demographic data is the harder one to get right now than the behavioral data. And so that's why I mentioned about listening in, doing polls, talking with the customers. We're seeing a lot of success in brands that are leading the way and shifting value props very rapidly. They're positioning their offerings. And the only way that you can do that is collect data really rapidly by listening to your company. So using kind of that voice of customer, especially right now, to influence the positioning and offerings and the like. We're seeing a lot of really cool examples in e-learning, for example, which of course is blowing up, but there's still a lot of shifts in demographics. Code Academy is a good example where, suddenly there's 91 or so percent, they say, I saw a statistic, 91% of kids are at home and learning from home these days. And Code Academy is not traditionally focused on like parents and kids, but suddenly they have a massive demographic of, that represents the, parents and kids. How to speak to them, where to speak to them, and how to create some learning from home types of funnels and tools for that demographic is really a big problem, or a good problem for them, but something that a lot of companies are having to deal with in analogous ways.
Yeah, to me, product strategy is all about prioritization, which is hard. Because you always have many more things that you want to do right away than you have engineering backlog for. So, the question to me is, how can you use data to help you rank those things that you want to ship to your customers and, decide on what to do next, because it will have the most impact on your business. And so thoughtful data collection really allows you to make those decisions. Specifically in terms of, customer experience optimization, there's so many touch points along the user journey, right? Whatever your product may be. But, for example, if it's, a checkout flow, you've got your landing page, you've got your product detail page, you've got your checkout page, and, how can you use data to sort of find the low-hanging fruit in optimizing that funnel? Where is the friction? Where are your users dropping off? Is it landing page or the product detail page? So for example, like if it is the product detail page and you're seeing this, really high drop-off rate, that shows you where to focus your efforts for, optimizing that customer's experience. And you can kind of sort of zero in on, what's important and what to prioritize, right? So, can you make it easier for them to find the checkout button? Is there something about an upper funnel that's confusing them so they can't get to, so they sort of have missed expectations, right? And I think, in general, this sort of way of thinking about data is exciting because, in the UX industry in general, there's a lot of folk wisdom about what works and what doesn't work. And what I like to think about is, can we approach some of these questions a little bit more scientifically? Can we gather, objective data and really kind of create scientific hypotheses and test those hypotheses to kind of sort of really drive kind of KPI driven results in sort of an objective framework. That's what's interesting to me about sort of driving product strategy with data.
I like that, breaking through the folk wisdom with science. Can you share some examples of companies that you think are doing this well and why?
I'm happy to jump in on that question. I think, well, I can look at it at least from a retail perspective, because I spend a lot of time looking at retail and e-commerce sites and understanding what they're doing. I mean, I think the one that we've all used that has been consistently a pretty good experience is Amazon. We order so much product. They kind of have the same benefit like Ben mentioned, Netflix and Google have. We order so much of our online products from them that they know what we want. They have a sense of when we're probably going to run out. They remind us when we need to reorder. That's a pretty good customer experience. The interesting thing, and I want to kind of contrast this because I think we've all experienced this. It's kind of like a shared COVID-19 pandemic experience. I've been online grocery shopping for probably now 2 or 3 years. And it used to be that I place my order and I get it the same day, if not the next day. Well, now, I'm one of 5% of customers who did that before. Now there's that number, that demand has grown tremendously. And those apps are not able to turn around the delivery as quickly. Some of the challenges they had early on, and I'm sure many of you have experienced these challenges, is that you go, you fill your basket, you are ready to place the order, and when you get to checkout, you see that there's no delivery times available. Like from a customer experience perspective, that is awful. You put a lot of time into your order, there's no dates. Even if you check back a few hours or the next day and you get a delivery time, by that time the items in your basket are out of stock. It's just horrible. What I just noticed recently, and it's like literally in the last week, that the companies that have been doing online delivery for grocery have pivoted, is upfront they give you a notice, no delivery times available today and tomorrow. So like I'm not going to bother to fill my basket right now because I'm not going to get a delivery time, and I'm just going to check back until there's a delivery time available, and then I'll take the time to fill my basket. So I think, that's an example of a pivot that the industry has had that's a good experience for the customer. It's not good that they can't get their groceries when they want them, but if that's the case, telling them before they bother to put the time into filling their basket is a better customer experience than like waiting until after. And that kind of communication as to what to expect is so critical, I think, from a good customer experience perspective.
Yeah, I'll add here a data point. In my experience, the last couple of weeks of seeing a brand and a company kind of come in using data to improve customer experience, but also just show market leadership. And that company's Toast, point of sale systems for restaurants. So this industry is kind of the opposite of the e-learning. It's one of the ones that are kind of in a lot of trouble. What they've done over the last few weeks has been pretty remarkable, though, using kind of their infrastructure and their data and their position to create really rapidly. Within, I think it was the middle of March, they launched a rallyforrestaurants.com, which is connecting users to support their local restaurants in really meaningful ways. They were one of the very first to stand this up. I think Yelp and some other GoFundMe have done some analogous things, but they stood it up real quickly on a dime, I would say. And then additionally, they set up a brand new product offering. So Toast Now, so getting restaurants that are more brick and mortar online so they can facilitate the deliveries and the e-gift cards and things like that, repackaged, rebundled what they have to something that's really relevant for the situation on the ground. And so that's a team that kind of is using their data, but also showing some marketing leadership in terms of pushing this stuff out really quickly, supporting their customers. And so I think that'll pay some dividends for them down the line.
I've actually used their service on one of the local restaurants here in the Shore, and it's actually really nice because they're not delivering through the Seamless and the DoorDashes of the world. They're trying to deliver on a smaller scale, and it's a nice customer experience.
Yeah.
So you've talked a little bit about, I guess some of the challenges overall that companies are facing now. Some of those haven't changed with COVID. Some of them are still the same. But what do you think some of those challenges companies face in improving their digital strategy? And how do you work around those challenges?
There was a joke that someone sent around that said, "Who led your digital transformation?" And it was like CEO, CTO, or COVID-19, and COVID-19 is circular.
I saw that.
I think companies are moving very quickly right now. But I would say, so Commerce Next does this annual survey for marketing leaders, and we ask them things like, what are some of their challenges? Where are they investing from a marketing standpoint? A lot of questions that give us a sense of how the industry is doing. And since COVID-19, we've been running more frequent surveys to get specific COVID-19 related data points and pivots that the industry has been doing. But from the original research, one of the things we saw was the biggest challenge, at least from the merchant class of companies, was being able to get that unified customer view. So, retail has this challenge where a lot of times data is in these very legacy systems, and getting it out of those systems and being able to understand, what customers, like, for example, store checkout could be a different data store than e-commerce, could be a different database than customer service. So being able to get all of those into one place, getting that unified customer view has been incredibly challenging. And what we saw was that 45% of merchants surveyed said that they were unsatisfied with their ability to get that unified customer view. And since we know that understanding the customer is one of the key factors for being effective at personalization, one of the other things we saw was that 49% of merchants said that they were unsatisfied with their personalization efforts. And I think those two obviously go hand in hand. And it's one of the big challenges that we're seeing in this industry. Unfortunately, I don't think it's a challenge that's going to get better with COVID-19. I think right now what I'm hearing when I talk to people is they're focusing on things like fulfillment from store or curbside pickup, things that kind of help them deal with inventory issues right now, as opposed to like a better online customer experience. But it's definitely something that was a high priority pre-COVID-19 for retailers and e-commerce brands.
Yeah, I would add real quick to that, Veronica, you mentioned the unified customer profile and the importance of that. And I would also sort of relate it as a unified KPI for the digital team, right? So a lot of times we see just, of course, the data silos and different teams doing different things. And we see a lot of success when you have some kind of unifier with regards to North Star metrics and a chief revenue officer, digital revenue officer or something like that, that's helping bridge these metrics across teams and to create more of that uniform vision and to be able to like move all these different teams together in a single direction. I would have loved to seen what Toast did to create a whole new product and a whole new website within days, where you see some companies that, because of these massive silos and not having that leadership from the top, whether it's driven by COVID or actual people, steer the ship in an agile way. So
yeah, I would say going beyond, those are great points, but even going beyond just having a good understanding of the data and a good strategy in place. I mean, another huge challenge is getting towards implementing those ideas, right? So there's this kind of huge chasm between the ideation stage of improving your product and the customer experience, and then the implementation stage, right? In the context of an A/B testing or optimization framework, that kind of work is extremely expensive, so it's risky. It's sort of limited based on you need a lot of traffic and you need time. So I've got a street sweeper coming by. Sorry about that. We're all working from home. We all are familiar. But yeah, you're forced to you're sort of forced to cram a bunch of ideas that you had into just a few testable experiences, because those experiences are so expensive, and so that's kind of clunky. It takes a long time. Tests take an average of like 8 months to get back results, and even then, not all of them actually are an improvement over control. So, it's hard to find meaningful improvement. And then, this is so expensive that, a lot of ideas wait in line for other tests to finish, right? So it's like the more that we can streamline that kind of end-to-end process flow of coming up with ideas and then actually getting them shipped, the better. And I think that's a real challenge for a lot of companies. Even if you've got good ideas, like how do you actually get them built and get them out there?
Yeah, Cash, I come from an academia space, and in science, there's a phenomenon known as the implementation crisis. And there's a bunch of literature on it. There's a whole branch of science called knowledge transfer science that is, we can analyze all day, we can make plans, but it's all meaningless unless we, hit the ground running with something and implement. And science is really good at confirming things, but not actually making things happen.
So as companies, especially now, companies are looking to reevaluate, streamline budgets where they can. But when it comes to analytics and data, what's imperative for companies to maintain and even double down on right now?
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick there. There's some really interesting data Patrick Campbell out of ProfitWell put together recently that I saw in a webinar of his along with, I think it was Reforge, Brian Balfour, but he's got a big database of especially B2B SaaS, but other industries and verticals as well, and big database, and surveyed them and looking at this question of buyer affinity and behavior and what's triggering people to convert, like what's the value propositions that are resonating. And pre-COVID and post-COVID, there was a huge just flip of the coin. And pre-COVID, it was all making me more money. That was a value proposition that was resonating and creating more conversions. And now it's save you costs. All right, that's the value proposition. Like people are kind of, especially right when on the onset in mid-March, people sort of clammed up, and cost savings was a big issue. And so there's this notion of it's above the line and essential, and below the line and like sweep it under the rug. What's critical right now, in my opinion, is listening to customers. Again, we're seeing a lot of success with companies that are launching new services in response to this, that are resonating with people, that are relevant for people. And the only way to discover that is by listening to people, understanding their motivations and anxieties and what they're going through, and then positioning your offerings, creating new offerings that are relevant to that. And so listening into calls, codifying customer support logs, all that kind of stuff is just really critical to have.
And Ben, I just add one thing, so in those surveys that we've been doing every 2 weeks, one of the questions we asked the merchants that took the survey is, have they revised their Q2 forecast as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic? And the data we got back was 89% have adjusted their forecast, but 55% have adjusted them downwards. So, we're definitely seeing, we know that a lot of companies are impacted. Their top line revenue is going to be impacted, which means it's going to be a lot of belt tightening when it comes to expenses. And, non-critical projects, unfortunately, getting a little bit sidelined right now as companies are just trying to weather the storm and get to the other end of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you guys are absolutely right. But I'd also say that, the world just changed in the past few months, and we don't know all the effects that it will have, right? It's impossible to predict, where we'll be 6 months from now. And, I think all that uncertainty is really, really a big challenge. It seems to me that rather than just looking for maybe like a 1% or 2% uplift here or there, you need to be looking for these kinds of like black swan events that can make or break your business. And so I think it's even more important than ever to, instrument your products and experiences and really be watching that data carefully, right? Maybe your traffic just dropped. And so it's all the more important to double down on optimization because you have to squeeze all the value out of that limited traffic that you have. Or maybe because of some other unforeseen market change, you're getting more data than ever. So more traffic than ever. So how do you really look out for that precious new customer base and kind of bring them in as continued customers? Sort of really looking for these like big shifts is, I think, kind of what people need to start doing more.
Yeah, and I would just add one thing, Cash, to what you mentioned. I think as part of that, it's what are they doing on their e-commerce site, but also what are they doing in their communications, because people's behavior has changed significantly. So there's no commuting times anymore. So when you send emails, it's going to be different, and the types of emails you send are going to be different because people are competing with a lot of demands all at the same time, whether it's kids at home or everything that they're juggling during this pandemic. It's interesting to kind of understand and adjust as a result.
Mm-hmm.
Veronica, what tools and technologies and strategies should companies use to get a unified view of their customers? This is a question that came through the survey earlier. So curious here, I know it was specific to outside of CRM. So maybe if you could speak to that.
Yeah, so I mean, the core technology that can be used to get a unified view of the customer is a customer data platform, also known as a CDP. And a CDP is similar to a CRM, except for that it can house both, it can house multiple sources of data. So it can include your first party data, like your orders, your browsing history, your click history. It can also include third party data, that you can either license or kind of acquire through other channels. And what the CDP does is it lets you create customer segments that you can market to, and then orchestrate those campaigns, not just through email, but through mobile, push, text, social, really any one-to-one channels. So I would say that's the main tool that people use these days for a unified customer view, and there's a number of players in the market that do that. But I think you could also use data visualization tools. I think people who have large data science teams are using, statistical software to analyze their data. And all of that, by the way, could get pushed into a CDP or could be kind of consumed separately or pushed into a personalization engine. There's a lot of, once you have it, there's a lot of different ways you can use it, and depending on what you're trying to do.
I'll add too, like the way you're setting up those CDPs and the audiences and segments that you're creating within them needs to, the logic that kind of supports that needs to come from an understanding of the problems and your audiences and where they're coming from and why they're
100%.
coming to you at the time. And so kind of speaking towards the current environment and the current kind of industry challenges right now with COVID, that examples that we brought up already, Code Academy having a whole new demographic come in, that's a whole new segment and audience maybe to speak to, Toast, same audience, but a whole new problem set, or maybe a similar problem set, but at a new priority, right? And so how you recreate that segment or recalibrate your audience within the CDP has got to be determined by these new problems, these new segments, and new demographics, new channels that are coming in. And the only way to really get a pulse on that is speaking with your customers, asking them what their current problems are, and keeping really a pulse on all of that right now.
So Ben, earlier you mentioned agility, and I think that that's a key word right now that everyone is so focused on across their organizations, because the ability for a company to stay nimble is going to basically keep them relevant throughout this process and enable them to move their strategy quickly. So Cash, curious, how do you build and sustain a good product management culture and ensure that there are no data silos?
Sure. The most important thing in my mind that the product function can do is connect the business value to the engineering implementation and the full tech stack. So to draw a through line from what is valuable to the business all the way through how are we going to implement that, communicating to the engineering team this is why it's important to build this thing, and so that they feel like what they're doing is meaningful and they know where they're driving, and then communicating back to the business, hey, this is the progress we're making and these are the changes we're making and this is how it's going to give you the value that you're looking for, right? So communication is obviously key. I think regular updates are really important. Product function should send out sprint updates, iteration updates to keep the whole business informed. I think a really good knowledge management resource. So keeping a wiki and keeping it up to date. And so giving somebody accountability and ownership of that wiki and that knowledge resource is really important. Rather than a bunch of emails flying around with the latest updates. While it's important to send out updates, if you also have a sort of central repository where everyone can go and look and see, what's the roadmap, what have we shipped recently, what are we planning on shipping, having that central place and keeping it clean, keeping it up to date so it doesn't get stale is really important. If you do have a data team, even if you don't, that data team or whoever's responsible for the data, should have really good data hygiene, intuitive naming of schemas, just keeping the data clean, having a team that looks through the data regularly and looks for sort of strange outliers and errors, and just kind of keeping that high quality data is really important. That's just sort of general in terms of software development, product management. I'd say, specific to kind of a UX optimization or sort of testing and experimentation program, what I think is really important is engendering a culture of experimentation. I like to talk about. So, Ben mentioned Netflix, and they've done that really, really well. So testing is in their DNA, and many people around the organization are enabled to test. And I think that's definitely what you want to do. And I mean, to get there, I think first you do need to set up a centralized team of experts who have the experience and tools to deploy experiments in your products. But then they have to have accountability for moving the needle and getting results. But then second, it's really important that they aren't a bottleneck for other people around the organization to do the same. So you should democratize the ability to perform tests through training of other employees and other teams, through using tools that are easy to use for non-technical users, and really kind of broaden that ability. And then finally, I'll just double down on a knowledge resource, right? But specific to testing, you don't want to waste traffic on a test that another team already found was not effective. You don't want to have to keep on rebuilding tests from scratch. So sort of really making sure that everyone keeps track of their learnings and builds on those learnings over time in a shared knowledge resource is, I think, really important. So those three things.
Yeah, and actually one thing I want to add to what Cash just mentioned, I mean, I think you were focusing on data primarily around creating a good product management culture, but I also think like data is really valuable for the whole company. So one of the key things is like really democratizing the data and as much as possible making it available and usable for everyone. Because I think the more that, for example, marketing can look at the data that you're seeing and then use that to adjust their campaigns, or other departments who may need it for, let's say, customer service and understanding like some of the challenges, like the more that you can make the data easily queryable and usable across the company, the more I think you get broader corporate buy-in on things that are being done from a product perspective, and also just understanding the customer's needs and wants.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There was a report that Forrester just put out on customer data maturity, and they reported that less than 10% of the firms excelled at applying their data strategy to their organization outside of marketing campaign context. So that supports that right there. It's so siloed across the entire business, and just being able to bring that all together so that the other functional areas can also take out from it what they need for their areas to excel. It's so important. I'm sorry, I think I cut you off, Ben. Were you about to say?
I like this topic a lot. Actually, we work with a lot of big organizations, and oftentimes we come in with an experimentation program on the marketing site, and we'll create a process and a framework for running experiments and reporting out on them, sort of a center of excellence that then starts to expand and get democratized and start to get engagement, down funnel into product and up funnel into acquisition, and get everyone into the same system. And we see a lot of successes with just ways of reporting out. Of course, you have the geeky, a lot of experimentation readouts that are for the core team. But one pager, high level, image heavy, C-level report outs that are on at an experiment level. And then it sounds cheeky, but we're seeing a huge success in like a monthly cadence of almost like an experimentation newsletter that goes out to a big, broad team. Like Cash, you brought up earlier, the implementation crisis idea. even if a marketing experiment that wins out gets implemented, you know, if it's not, if that doesn't, and Veronica, you brought it up, if that doesn't influence maybe how the acquisition team is influencing their campaigns and leveraging that success further, then the win of that is really limited. So we're seeing it's really fun to start to mainstream a lot of this and do that knowledge transfer. Yeah.
And oftentimes, I mean, as a marketer, you never know where your next campaign inspiration is going to come from. And a lot of times I think folks in the product or in that engineering realm, they don't necessarily know that what they're holding is golden to a marketing or an advertising campaign. So I think that's a really great topic. Digging a little bit more into the different types of data, Ben, what kinds of quantitative data should companies strive to collect to maintain an agile digital strategy, especially, of course, given recent events?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier about the idea of the kind of the teams and data, or team silos, and where it's effective to shift digital strategy when you have somebody coming in with these North Star metrics. And an experimentation program is the same. So in terms of the quantitative metrics that we love, it's the downstream quality metrics. So if it's e-commerce, it's lifetime value, churn, you know, related to maybe subscription e-commerce. If it's lead gen, it might be opportunity rates, rejection rates, the things that are really get way closer to revenue. And you can tie it all the way back to different experimentation campaigns. And those are the metrics that help bridge, you know, from the marketing to sales to product to UX to data teams towards that universal revenue goal, right? And there a lot of times it's hard to get right, and quant isn't enough, and the quantitative instrumentation there is starting to be table stakes, sort of the standard way of doing things. That more people have, you know, there's more and more CDPs out there. More and more personalization happening, and the connection of all of this data. And so now it's really starting to create these personalized campaigns, not just based on what is happening, but the reasons behind it, the why, the feelings that customers are having, the way that people get success from a brand, from a purchase, is not because I got this feature at this price. It's because it made me who I am. Like, I buy Patagonia clothing because it makes me a person that cares for the environment, right? That's a very distinct thing, and that's not what the, you know, behavioral funnel will tell you. So more and more, the instrumentation based on revenue is important, but doing it based on these cohorts for understanding certainty of success and how people describe themselves, that tying that together is starting to be the big challenge. Yeah. Oh, you're muted, Maren.
Oh, thank you. Just as we've seen personalization become such a huge theme and buzzword, that data piece and being able to dive a little bit deeper than the, you know, even just simply in email marketing, being able to really be sophisticated in how you segment those audiences, how you look at folks when they're coming in the website. It's no longer just about male, female, and your functional role and what type of industry you're in. And those companies that can really bridge that gap and push it to that next level are those that are going to be able to create those really highly personalized experiences that are going to establish themselves as a brand, most likely for people to come back. And that's what's most important right now. And we're seeing that. What's the best way to collect qualitative data from customers? And specifically the departments, where can you lean on that already and have valuable qualitative information? Ben, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, the front lines of this is going to be customer service and sales teams. So interviewing these groups, listening in on calls. If you've got just massive amounts, you can codify those call logs with the chat logs and things like that. Other ways are going to be on-site polling, exit intent polling, surveying customers, asking them about motivations and maybe what almost held them back from this side of things. I think user testing is less important right now. Perceptions have really shifted, and user testing is not going to get there. So it's really understanding anxieties. So on-site exit intent polling. If you've got kind of an enterprise solution there to do NPS, benchmarking and tracking the user experience in a more quantitative way, that's also good to kind of keep a pulse on that. But really, again, the front lines, the go-to is going to be customer service and sales teams.
The call recordings is so interesting because even again, as a marketer, I think sometimes there's so much gold in those conversations that would typically just stay in the call recording queue and no one would ever hear it or see it again. And it is a highly manual job to get that and garner that information from there, but there is so much there. So thanks. I think those are couple great areas. Veronica, what are your thoughts here?
I guess in terms of qualitative data, there's so many ways you can get qualitative data. It depends on, where you look. So for example, social media, I'm sure those grocery companies that had customers filling their carts and then not being able to get a delivery date had a lot of complaints on social media. That was something you heard often. So I think, you can build it into your product, you can build it into your e-commerce experience, you can collect it from customer service, but your customers don't just live in the channels that you make available for them to sell products. They live wherever they are at the moment, and they're going to talk about a good and a bad experience where they are. And some of the companies that have really succeeded are ones that engage their customers on those social channels and then have conversations and learn and kind of pull that into then more kind of concrete, hypothesis-driven, product-based tasks that they can then, evolve into products, whether it's digital products or even physical products that they end up later manufacturing. It's interesting to kind of see how much your customers tell you when you don't even ask them on social media.
I would add that it depends on what kind of customer you have, what kind of product you have. It's one thing if you have many, many, many small customers with light touch points, but if your customers are enterprise businesses with like a SaaS product,
sure,
like ours is, where you can invite them to a session. I get a lot of value out of that. Sit down with a customer that you have a good relationship with, and invite them to this conversation where you ask them deep questions about how they're experiencing your product and what they want, and record that and take notes and then share that with the rest of the team in the company. I get a lot of value out of that. One other thing I'll mention, is if you are casting sort of a wider net, I think really careful NPS survey design is really important. Your customer attention span is precious, and so you don't want to send them surveys that are too long. You don't want to contact them too frequently. So finding that right balance between the right questions and the right survey and then the right cadence to send those out is, I think, really important. And there are some really kind of creative strategies around shortening the survey, but finding kind of relationships between questions that, when answered in certain ways, can pull out certain hidden patterns in the way your customers are using your product. And that's something that is really fun to do, and I think can lead to some hidden insights.
Diving a little bit more into the qualitative data, how can that influence how you emotionally connect to your customers?
Yeah, I'll take this one, Myron. It kind of relates to the answer that I gave earlier with regards of making that leap between kind of the data that you have at hand and what customers might be feeling. Because what people are doing through a digital experience can help you infer what they feel, but it doesn't really help out too much. If they don't buy something from you, you don't have any idea why. And even if they do buy, you don't know why. And so the why is just it's just the justification. People really buy things, like I mentioned earlier, because of the way that it makes them feel. And these days, COVID status and self-signaling might be really less important, but security, certainty of success, comfort, these might be the feelings that really people are resonating with more and more. And so qualitative data, gathering it can help people describe their motivations, anxieties, perceptions, but it's still what they're saying. It's still our job to interpret what they say and to sort of read between the lines about what they're feeling and create positioning statements, create value propositions relative to that. It's all kind of the related to the left-right brain, mammalian, reptilian brain, system 1, system 2 type of stuff, the online psychology. So, and I'll note, Cash, on your comment earlier with regards of crafting the NPS and these surveys intelligently and not sending out a ton of emails. I will say that open rates are really high right now. If you're going to be aggressive with emails for a short period, be aggressive, send a bunch of emails out right now.
Cash, you had mentioned NPS surveys. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like so that you're not annoying folks? What are some key pointers you have there?
Sure. So, what you find is there'll usually be one team that's sending out the email and they kind of craft the survey, and that team has something that they're accountable for, and so they're trying to get some information from the customer base. But you have other teams that want to get their questions into the survey too, because they care about things, right? So, there's, for example, maybe it's the customer success team that's sending out a survey. And so that what they care about is kind of, what is the customer's experience with the kinds of, white gloves, person-to-person expert services that they're getting, right? But the product team wants to know, well, how well is the customer using the tool? So can you just add a few more questions about, which features would you like to add to the product, right? So that you're getting the human experience questions, and then you're also getting some feature questions, right? But rather than going down that direction of just piling on questions from all the departments that want to know what the customer thinks about, their own area of work, you could do something like, look at your NPS score, 0 to 10, right? And then ask them, why did you give that score? And then put those different sort of areas in that question. Like, was it the expert services? Was it the product? Was it the brand, right? And then, okay, maybe there's a few more questions, keep it short. Then when you get back the data from that survey, look at it. And if they ranked particularly low or particularly high, and then picked one of those departments, right? You can, just for that subset of users, send out a more focused questionnaire around that specific question, whether it's expert services or product features, right? Rather than trying to cram it all into one survey. Like, that's an example.
I think that's a great idea. So we've got about 7 minutes left. So I wanted to put it out there. If anyone does have a question, please feel free to put those in the queue. We'll be answering those in a couple minutes here. But I do want to ask one final question, a big buzzword here. What does it really mean to make data actionable? And why is this a key challenge companies face? Veronica?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. So first, to make data actionable, you need to have it in one place. That's going to be the key, and we talked a lot about that on this webinar. And then once you have the data in one place, then how do you create the right communications, whether they're on the website or whether they're through email or through whatever experiences the customers have? How do you create the right triggers, the right customizations that address the customer needs? And I think there's a couple of challenges that are often, let's say, roadblocks or stumbling blocks. One is getting all of the data, like I mentioned before, with the data being siloed, sometimes it's hard to get it in one place. And when you miss big chunks of data, you could have blind spots in understanding the customer. But then the other thing is, when you think about creating your segments, you want to be careful not to over segment, because one of the next kind of stumbling block I often hear is content creation. There's a lot that can go into content creation, especially if your brand is particularly concerned about high fidelity content. And, when you over segment, you then have to start creating content for each of those segments, and that can become a challenge. So sometimes, like one person I know used to work at Petco, and she said for them, it was like a big difference to just get to dog person, cat person, or both. Like once you get to that, then you can get to like your results improve a lot. And then beyond that, do they have a small dog? Do they have a big dog? Like that's nice, but not as important as understanding, are they a dog person, cat person, or both? So like think about the segments that matter And then you can easily create content for a smaller number of segments. And then you can use that kind of those results to then invest in more granular segments as you find they actually move the needle.
Thanks, Veronica. So we're at the last 5 minutes here, and I wanted to open it up for questions. So the first question, I think this is actually going to be punted right back at you, Veronica. Can you share with us a little bit about personalization? You mentioned without data that it's hard to execute personalization. I'm driving personalization for my organization, but I'm concerned we are not quite ready yet. What pointers do you have for me to help the organization properly set expectations?
Oh, that's a great question. And I think sometimes the way that folks look at it is they look at personalization as being all or nothing. I'm either not doing personalization at all, or I'm all the way to one-to-one. And like, that is very, very difficult. And I think you can look at it as like baby steps, you know, like walk, crawl, run. So what can you do? Can you create large segments? Can you understand, you know, large buckets of customers that may have different needs? Can you understand triggers, like a behavior that they had that may trigger a certain kind of email response? You know, for example, a product is on the way, or they abandoned their cart, or they abandoned, like they were going through some part of the journey and they kind of abandoned that process. Like those triggers can be personalized without necessarily like creating a whole segment around them. You know, it's easier to personalize email sometimes than it is to personalize websites, although, you know, there's technologies like Evolv that help personalize websites as well. So I think you don't have to take it all at once, right? You can just take bite-sized pieces and kind of think of it as a progression and do what you can little by little, and then just keep getting better and better at it over time.
And then it looks like we have time for one last question. So I currently rely on IT to get data. It's time consuming and keeps our team from innovating quickly. What are some selling points or recommendations you have on how I could build some internal momentum on this issue? I'll put that out to the group.
I mean, I would say IT shouldn't be the gatekeeper of data. Like, I mean, I think that sometimes that can be a political question. It shouldn't be a political question. I think you want to put the data in a place where everyone can access it, and they should be able to query it without knowing how to do C or some other, you know, statistical language in order to be able to understand segments of their data. You want to have it out there. You want it accessible, and you really want your product marketing teams all on one page in terms of understanding the data. And tools like a CDP, which, as we talked about earlier, are really helpful because they're designed to be like a marketer's friend. They're designed to be user-friendly tools that let you query and understand the data.
Yeah, similar, you know, set up something like Looker or Tableau, which has a user-friendly front end, and, you know, have your data team build, you know, BI views on top of, you know, whatever data warehouse, whatever databases exist, and have those views available to everyone in the company so that they can go and filter and explore the data themselves. Really make it self-serve. I think that's the most important thing.
All right. Well, we are coming out and closing on the hour, and I already can see my child in the garden back here, so it must be break time. So thank you all so much for joining. Thanks for attending. Thank you to our panelists, Veronica, Ben, and Cash, and our participants for joining us today. A recording will be available. Stay healthy, stay safe. Take care, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.